this game is a badass simulator called Robo Rumble, and it's inspired by the game Carlson, which is made by a fellow YouTuber, Dani. Dani is almost at 1 million subs, so go help him reach that goal if you're not already subbed him. Before we get into the real meat of Robo Rumble, we first need to understand what makes something or someone badass and how I can translate that into a game. The Urban Dictionary defines a badass as someone who does what he wants, when he wants, where he wants. You won't find him on Facebook because he's probably out being cool somewhere. He might be on a motorcycle, but it's probably not a Harley or a crotch rocket because he won't spend that much money to be accepted. He feels no obligation whatsoever to justify his beliefs, values, convictions, morals, etc. with anyone. He likes his music because it sounds cool to him. You won't find him if you look for him because there's no sure way to identify him. One does not think that he is badass, he knows it, and that's that. Alternatively, a badass is someone who is the complete opposite of a douchebag. Thanks, Urban Dictionary. Very cool. In simpler terms, a badass is someone who doesn't act cool to look cool, they just are cool and everyone knows it. If someone acts cool to look cool, that's what's known as a poser. That's an okay start, but how about we get a little bit more specific? The first rule of a badass, as I just implied, is that they don't talk about being a badass. The second rule of being a badass is that a badass does not try to be a badass or look tough. A badass is simply badass. The third rule of being a badass is that a badass does not give up. Badasses will push themselves for the better no matter how hard it gets. The fourth rule of a badass is that a badass is not a dick. A badass does not prey on the weak and shows kindness in return to those who are kind. Fifth rule of being a badass knows his limits. They know that if they're not some immortal being, they'll die if they jump off a building or run wildly into a gunfight without surveying their surroundings first. Now that we know what a badass is, we need to figure out how to implement these into our game to make you, the player, feel like a badass. Let's brainstorm and go through the rules one by one and find a way to incorporate each rule into our game. Rule number 1 is that a badass doesn't talk about being badass. Now, this is a hard one because we're making a game, not a movie. If this were a movie, we could just not have our protagonists mention that they're just really cool. In a game, it's honestly impossible to control how players themselves think. That's all on them. So we'll come back to this one later. Rule number 2 is that a badass does not try to look tough just for the sake of looking tough. A badass is just simply badass. The way that I interpret this is that a badass will only use their skills when necessary. We could incorporate this through an almost rating system, through specific events. Like for instance, don't attack someone if they don't attack you first. At the same time, this is a game and I don't want the player to feel restricted in what they can and cannot do. A way to make this work is to allow the player to attack enemies whenever they want, but it will have an impact on their overall badass score and will alter the way enemies attack the player. Rule number 3 is that a badass does not give up and will always push themselves for better no matter how hard it gets. This is what's commonly known as perseverance, and everyone has different thresholds for how much they can persevere. Some people will give up after only a few attempts at a difficult task, where others will keep going after the same task and won't stop until it's completed. In order for the player to persevere through any challenge the game throws at them, we'll need to implement some incentive for them to keep going. We can figure out what the incentive will be later. Rule number 4 is that a badass does not prey on the weak, and shows kindness in return to those who are kind. This one's also difficult because you're a robot in a test chamber, so there wouldn't be any moral situations, but I could try to fit something in if anything comes to mind. The 5th and final rule is that a badass knows his limits. This one's easy. You as a player will have to judge your own skills and know your limits and approach a situation based on your skill set. If you're not an avid movement FPS player, then it's probably not the smartest idea for you to charge into a fight guns blazing, because that'll just result in your death. I need to make the player actually think about how they'll approach any situation before taking action. Now, we can finally get into the game itself. First off, I started making a small room with Pro Builder. I didn't really have any plan in mind for the atmosphere besides the test chamber, so I made a big room with a dip in the floor for some reason. As for the robot himself, I made a camera motor for the main camera using Game Creator, and then started working on the movement. But yeah, that didn't work. I decided, hey, you know what, fuck it. I always write my own scripts, why not use a movement controller from the asset store, and that's what I did. After waiting 32 years and 7 months for the ultimate character controller to install, I went ahead and attempted to Frankenstein my way to a working character, and now it finally works. I forgot to mention, making someone badass in a game is much harder than in a movie. In a movie, you just tell the actor what to do and they do it, so then we feel like that character is badass. In a game, however, we still really need to make the player feel like a fully fledged badass. And how do we do that? With movement, of course. So I scrapped the whole ultimate character controller and went to make my own movements. And after a full 3 days of coding, I got a somewhat working wall script. I honestly didn't feel satisfied, so like any respectable indie game dev, I deleted the entire script and copied someone else's. Okay, before you get your panties in a bunch, I didn't completely rip someone else's code. I copied it, tried it out, and now I'm going to rework it and use it as a base to make my own movement. I know this one's a little short, but this is just the beginnings of the game, so there's not much to be said. As I get more and more done, these will become a lot more entertaining. I'm going to try and get some more movement mechanics and levels done in the next devlog, along with making some enemies and some shooty gun bang bangs. I hope you enjoyed, and if you're not already, consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Every little bit helps. Next video will be the finale to Unchained Mains, so be sure to stick around for that. Adios!